right, so let's look at the race for hung municipal councils across South Africa. Johannesburg, it sounds like still up for the taking. The Patriotic Alliance announcing that deal. It only has one seat in Johannesburg. We'll see how that works. It says, through this deal, it says it's gained its own municipality and 7 mayoral committee member seats. The EFF says the ANC has insulted it by sending junior members to talks, and it will hurt the governing party where it can in municipalities. And then, of course, we've seen several political parties talking aimed at taking over Tshwane. That stalled yesterday, resulting in a call for a postponement of the inaugural council meeting that was scheduled for Thursday. The DA still suggesting it's confident it can lead a coalition in Tshwane. It would need to work together with several other parties to make that happen. Let's get some analysis now. We're joined by TK Pooe, who's a public policy specialist at Wits University. We're also joined by political analyst Asanda Ngoasheng. Let me start with you, Mr. Pooe. There was this hope that the parties would be mature this time around, that we wouldn't see the squabbles that led to incredible ructions in municipalities last time, where there was no clear leader over time and affected service delivery. From the rhetoric that you've heard today from the parties, do you think it could be better this time around? It sounds like there are already a lot of hitting of heads, as it were.
No, evening. I don't know where this hope was coming from if you were to look at what happened in the previous 5 years leading up to this election and how coalitions were working. Towards the end of, I think, the cycle, we saw a lot of coalitions, people just falling out. And it also brings us to the point which I've always stressed, which is what is the genesis and what is the ground rooting of these coalitions? Now, as you've given us a cognizant omnibus from the EFF to the DA to the PA, and the critical thing which one really seems to hear from all of them, that there is nothing that really binds them together. One party will say, listen, you give us a mayor, we're fine with you. One will mix local with national issues, and another will flip and I think they'll work according to the circumstance. And here I'm speaking about the DA in relation to the Sadeberg municipality, where the principle, as they say it, is, look, if we got more votes than us, we can still go into coalition, we have no problems with you. So for me, it really is no surprise, because South Africa's politicians, that when it comes to maturity and looking after citizens, really don't have a great track record, hence the voting numbers we saw in the last elections.
Ms. Ngoasheng, are you equally pessimistic?
I mean, I think that we have the potential and the ability to create a new kind of coalition government cooperation system than we have in the past 5 years. And I think it's the responsibility of the IEC and other institutions that are interested in the implementation of democracy in this country, who should be watching with a keen eye how these coalition talks are going, and should be providing some facilitation, I think, around the coalition talks and engaging the different political parties on how to do some of the talks. Because right now what's happening is it seems to be kind of the Wild Wild West, where people are coming with very big kind of demands of political parties that, although they did not win the majority vote, but they did actually win a large chunk of the vote. And so you can't negotiate with somebody who's sitting on 40% as if you're negotiating with somebody who's sitting on 10%, when you yourself are sitting on 2% or just a percentage that's under 10%. And so a lot of what's happening now is the inability of many of the smaller political parties, in my opinion, to put aside their egos and figure out what is the best thing to do in the interest of South Africans and in the interest of making sure that the will and, the desires of South Africans are put first before any egos and before any kind of political party mandates and power mongering. And so we are going to continue to see a lot of stalemates if people are not coming to these negotiations with the honesty that being a kind of kingmaker and a power maker in some instances doesn't mean you have all the power. Because one of the things that's happened in this election that's kind of different from 5 years ago is that although the DA and the African National Congress haven't won kind of the kind of close to majorities that they've seen in the past, there are a lot more smaller parties that they can negotiate with. And that does diminish the impact and the possibility of the EFFs of this world, and even some of the organizations that have received quite a biggish chunk but are still small, like Action SA. And so there's a sense in which people need to be realistic and pragmatic in the negotiation, but egos are definitely getting in the way. I mean, some of the complaints of the EFF, I simply didn't understand, because, as much as the ANC requires some part of you to rule, the ANC can still go to other political parties and gain a majority seat. It's not as if without your seat, they then are definitely unable to gain the majority. And so people need to be a lot more pragmatic than they are at this point in time. But of course, in negotiations, we see this all the time, where people come in with a huge ask and kind of try to posture. And then when reality hits and they realize that they run the risk of losing completely, they then come back to the drawing table. So I see this almost like as a round one, and we're likely to see potentially some last minute wangling and last minute deal making as people realize that they don't have as much power as they initially thought they had.
Except for the Patriotic Alliance, who has announced this big deal with the ANC. Mr. Pooe, your comments on that, because the Patriotic Alliance has been, it's made no bones about the fact that it wants mayoral positions, and Gayton McKenzie saying that it's achieved that. In fact, it will run a municipality because of this deal with the ANC. And we've seen this in the past, where small parties gained mayoral chains, the UDM in Nelson Mandela Bay, but we know how fractured things have been there. The DA's position is that the smaller parties should accept that they are the junior members of a coalition. In terms of democracy, in terms of service delivery, is this deal between the ANC and the Patriotic Alliance good for us or not?
Well, I think it's more I think it's an agreement of necessity rather than, there's great principles attached to it. Because as you said, even if you look at what happened in the Eastern Cape regarding the PA, it seems to be the status quo, the modus operandi that, look, they are very practical about what they want, whether it's good or bad. But then the problem seems to be, and I think the UDM has experienced it, is after this happens, if you don't do a good job, the one who wears the chain is going to be the one that gets the fallout. Now, I think you just made an insert where I think the deputy president of the PA was speaking about, listen, the ANC didn't care whether we had experience or not, which should be a telltale sign of there's a problem. That here's an ANC willing to negotiate, basically give away a municipality to a party that doesn't have that experience. Some might argue, listen, the ANC's got experience, but they've done nothing. So maybe it's a non-starter there. But the point is to say, if you're a citizen of that municipality, what you look at is to say, yes, no one got 50%, but are you simply just pawning us away for the purposes of political expediency? And if that's the case, then it says to me that, you as a political party, i.e. the ANC, has not learned their lesson that they're taking voters for granted. And if this is simply a marriage of convenience, or rather inconvenience, who's going to take the problem? Well, basically, who's going to bear the brunt if there's no service delivery because the new party doesn't know how to run a municipality? Do they blame you as one of the largest voting percentage? Or do they blame the mayor, who will gladly say, listen, got the coalition, got the mayor's chain, learning on the job, don't mind if I make mistakes? And this goes back to a central point I've always asked, which is to say, if you go to many of these political parties' manifestos, where is the discussion about coalitions and principles? And for me, that's been the missing thing. So we should not be surprised that we're at this point where it's going to be just marriages of basic convenience rather than principles and anything else. And the problem is going to be you and I as a citizen, depending where we are in the South African map, we're going to suffer for this. And I think we really do need to maybe hold them a bit more accountable to say, listen, what are your principles in relation to service delivery? And does this always need to go to the point of a mayorship? Why can't you just simply negotiate when it comes to MMC positions, give the mayor to one who has the largest voting percentage, establish that as a principle throughout South Africa? Yeah. So I think it's unfortunate, really, more than anything else.
Well, Ms. Ngoasheng, what about the EFF saying that it's sticking to its principles, and the ANC didn't want to have a talk about its overriding principles? It just wanted to talk about position, and it sent junior members. So the EFF, on one hand, sticking to its principles. It often speaks of the 7 pillars, but now it says that it will hurt the ANC wherever it can in any young municipality. does that inspire confidence to the members of those municipalities, the people who reside in them?
I mean, I think this is exactly what I was talking about when I was talking about political parties needing to be realistic and put aside their egos, because this is the talk of people who have overplayed the hand, who have overestimated their power and their possibility. And I think that, it's exactly what I said earlier, that political parties, particularly the smaller ones, need to be a lot more practical, a lot more pragmatic, and a lot more realistic, because you can't come to a political party that is closer to the majority than you are and demand that your political party's 7 pillars be implemented. That's just ridiculous and not going to happen anywhere on this planet. So I think that the more realistic thing to do is to figure out what are the things that we can agree on and how do we work in the best interests of the voter. And I think that, some of what we've seen that the EFF has won a lot of proportional representation seats, but they have failed to get leadership precisely because of this. They fail at providing leadership. They fail at showing maturity when it's most required, because these negotiations require the highest level of maturity. And making statements like they are going to hurt the ANC, they are going to make life difficult for the ANC, does not inspire confidence, because if the ANC is the one that's in power, what people want is governments that work. They're not looking for vindictive statements or vindictive kind of, promises from their political parties. They want political parties, yes, who are going to challenge the ANC and its power, yes, who are going to challenge the status quo, but not people who are going to personalize it to a point of, you can't agree with us, you're not giving us what we want, and therefore we're going to throw a tantrum like a 3-year-old and say we're going to hurt you. I mean, what kind of political mature leadership says things like that at such a critical moment in our democracy when we're trying to figure out how do we come together as a nation towards what the voters want in service delivery? This is not about the EFF. This is not about who's bigger, who's not bigger, and who's more important. This is about executing the mandate that the voters have given these political parties and doing it at the most mature level.
Mr. Pooe, before we run out of time, I want to look at some specific municipalities or metros, the highly contested one. The DA has suggested it's confident it will get Tshwane, so there it'll have to work, I think, with Action SA, Freedom Front Plus, the ACDP and COPE. Now let's look at Joburg. Tell me what you think is going on there. The ANC got 91 seats, the DA 71 seats. Action SA coming in third with 44 seats. Now, Action SA doesn't want to work with the ANC. It doesn't look like the ANC and the DA are going to work together. But the DA says it might not get Joburg. Who do you think could be victorious there?
Well, I think the balance of forces there really lie with where Action SA wants to go. If the DA manages to put, I think, Tshwane together, I think they could probably try the same in Joburg, but looking at maybe including parties like the IFP and also the ACDP. So I think it really just depends on how they formulate and what's going to happen around the city of Tshwane. It's going to have a cascading effect. But I think, look, the major principle there, again, it's going to be the question of, for me, I can look past whether they form coalitions or not, because I think by virtue of necessity that's going to happen. Politicians will always put themselves first. But for me, it's going to be what's going to hold them together. Because what we don't want is that you and I are going to have this discussion 2 months from now. We're going through our fifth iteration of this coalition. So for me, more than how they come together, it's going to be the question of what keeps them together. Because if that's the problem we're going to have, 5 years is a very long time. If you keep having broken marriages like the ones we're going to experience.
Well, then on that, very quickly, the DA has said the law is against them. It provides for a few weeks to put together coalition governments. In other countries, politicians are given months. Is that actually contributing to unstable coalitions if there has to be a rush and it's frenzied right now? Mr. Pooe.
I think the problem there is that they're looking at the wrong thing again. You can't look at laws which you and I can both read before time and then say, well, that's a problem. Then the question is going to be, what were you doing 4 years before that? because most of the numbers heading into these elections stated that, listen, there's a high likelihood that we're going to have coalitions. So the key question was going to be, why did you not plan this beforehand? And this seems to be a very common custom in South African politics where, because we did not plan, the law must be wrong. And I think we should really quickly try to put that to an end and really say, listen, you've got 4 years. What are you doing in those 4 years? Or are you simply just twiddling your thumbs and saying, well, this thing called elections is happening. Let's see what happens. If that's the case, we should not be surprised at the state of our municipalities and state of South African politics as a whole.
All right, thank you very much. Public policy specialist at Wits, TK Pooe, political analyst Asanda Ngoasheng.